more now on North Korea's alleged hydrogen bomb test. We are joined now by senior national security analyst Juan Zarate. We say alleged because we don't have any proof yet that this actually happened, Juan. But what does it mean if it actually did happen? Or maybe if it didn't happen, but they're alleging that it did. What sort of message do you think North Korea is trying to send out?
Well, Anne-Marie, regardless of whether or not it was an atomic test or a hydrogen test and bomb, the reality is that the North Koreans are trying to demonstrate that they are making progress in their nuclear program. They are trying to make technological advancements. They're clearly trying to move toward miniaturization, which would allow them to weaponize this more effectively, and then tie that to their ballistic missile capabilities that they continue to develop. And again, whether or not it's an atomic bomb that relates to and looks a lot like the past nuclear tests, the three tests that we saw in 2006, 2009, and 2013, or whether or not this is a technological leap toward a hydrogen capability, regardless, they are progressing, and the threat is getting more and more real and obviously more and more destabilizing when these kinds of tests happen. They're trying to project strength. They're trying to project stability, and for a young, erratic leader who's trying to ensconce his leadership, purge internally, this is a message not just to the outside world, but also a message of strength internally. And so this is an important moment for the regime.
You always wonder about the timing of these sort of things. And do you think there's any coincidence if there's a big birthday coming up with the leader? All eyes now are on the Middle East. Do you think that may have anything to do with the timing?
It's hard to tell. Again, we don't know enough about this particular leader, Kim Jong-un. He's young, erratic, inexperienced. He's taken various steps that have sent mixed messages. He had a New Year's Day message that seemed to suggest further desires for reconciliation with the South. There had been thawing of relations not just with China but also with South Korea in recent weeks. And so this appears a bit sort of erratic, but this sort of picture of an erratic regime is precisely what you would predict coming out of Pyongyang. Whether or not it's tied to a particular anniversary or not, it's hard to tell. But certainly they've used these tests to demonstrate not just power, but to try to get not only the world's attention, but something at the negotiating table if, in fact, they reach that table. The problem, Anne-Marie, is, as you know, there are no negotiations underway. The six-party talks ended in 2009. And as Seth mentioned just a moment ago, the Chinese, American, and other diplomats have tried to get back to the table for some time, and the North Koreans have not been interested. Yeah,
let's talk a little bit about that. Seth also said that China holds a tremendous amount of sway over North Korea. North Korea is dependent economically quite a lot on China. I'm wondering if this could have an impact on Chinese-U.S. relations at all.
Well, I think it certainly ups the ante and prioritizes the North Korea issue in the context of the U.S.-Chinese relationship. We've got a lot of issues to work with China on. Certainly China, a rising economic, military, and global power in many ways. North Korea now has to sort of creep to the top of the list of our agenda items. That's not clear. It's not clear to me that that's been the case to date. It now has to be. And the question for China, and certainly this is something the U.S. will prompt, is whether or not the Chinese are not only willing but also able to influence what happens in Pyongyang, and whether or not China will actually be a 21st century responsible global actor, demonstrating it first and foremost in the context of this Korean crisis. I think that's really a core question and will certainly be at the top of the agenda between the U.S. and China moving forward.
Well, North Korea's announcement has prompted an emergency meeting at the United Nations today. What do you think will come out of that meeting?
Well, certainly you've already seen strong words of condemnation out of Beijing, Seoul, Tokyo, Washington. You're going to see that reiterated out of the UN. You're likely going to see it move to strengthen some of the sanctions, some of the travel bans, perhaps expansion of the list of those designated parties whose assets will be frozen, further restrictions on shipping, moving in and out of North Korea. You're also going to see, outside of the UN auspices, moves by the U.S. to reassure its allies in South Korea, in Japan. Recall that after the last nuclear test in February of 2013, the U.S. sent very openly and explicitly 2 B-2 bombers from Missouri to South Korea to drop inert bombs over a field in South Korea to further remind the North Koreans of our capabilities and our willingness to defend the South Koreans, to include with nuclear weapons. And so you're going to see a lot of condemnation, an attempt to isolate the North Koreans, strengthening perhaps of sanctions, and a reinforcement of the defensive posture we have with our allies in the region.
Now, South Korea has actually expressed doubt that this test was even real. What are the odds that North Korea was just making this whole thing up?
Well, something certainly happened, and the patterns seem to suggest that this was another test. You have to take with somewhat a grain of salt what the North Koreans proclaim to have achieved. They're often engaged in bluster and brinksmanship. And so you've got to sort of take with a grain of salt and sort of test the evidence. Something happened here, and certainly the North Koreans have been willing to test nuclear weapons in the past. They've done it 3 times before. They've been progressing in their nuclear program. There's been no suggestion that they're going to stop. And so something happened. The suspicion, the very strong suspicion, is that it was a nuclear test. Whether or not it was a hydrogen bomb versus an atomic test is yet to be seen. But certainly this is a serious moment, and the fact that the North Koreans are at a minimum trying to signal this capability is worrisome given where they are trying to take that capability.
Right. Juan Zarate, thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne Marie.